Gerontological Society of America, Advancing Innovation in Aging. Welcome to GSA on Aging. I'm Howard Dagenholt, social media editor of The Gerontologist, a bi-monthly publication of the Gerontological Society of America. Dr. Gloria Puurveen is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of British Columbia School of Nursing. Her research focuses on people with advanced dementia in nursing homes and end-of-life care. I spoke with her about her paper in The Gerontologist, A Seat at the Table, the Positioning of Families During Care Conferences in Nursing Homes.
Hello, Gloria speaking.
Hi, Gloria. This is Howard. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Great. Let's get started.
Sure.
So I read your paper, A Seat at the Table, Positioning of Families During Care Conferences in Nursing Homes. And I'd like to ask you about the study and about your work. What got you interested in this topic?
So I was a postdoc researcher on this project from the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia under the direction of Dr. Jennifer Bombush. And it's part of a larger study called the IDEAL Study, which is about inviting dialogue on experiences of active involvement in long-term care. And I was, as a postdoc, very interested in the idea of how family care staff and residents were negotiating care and making decisions within the care conference context. And so I got the great privilege of working with Jennifer on this project and focusing on the care conferences in particular. So, yeah, that's where I come from.
So tell me, I'm curious about the larger study and what you found, but in terms of this qualitative research, what were the main findings there?
There were some real surprising findings from my perspective, and one of them was about just how marginalized families were within that context. And that kind of was born out of some sort of very exclusionary practices that we observed within the care conferences across the 3 sites. So that was surprising to me in the sense that this was showing up in all of the sites in those 37 conferences that we observed. And so how families were excluded from this was just in 3 very simple kind of ways. One was by this real adherence to following a process, a scripted process that families were not privy to. So they had no idea about the agenda. They were often positioned last on that agenda. And if they kind of moved off that agenda and off the script, staff and the other participants in the conference would bring them back to that script. So spontaneous offerings of resident information or biographical information was not necessarily welcomed as it was off the script.
What's at stake with involvement of families in care conferences?
Well, care conferences are a real opportunity to discuss the resident and the full complexity of the resident. So not just physical and medical or clinical care, but also their psychosocial and spiritual needs. And families bring real important biographical information to that table. They have a real close perspective on residents' needs and experiences. And without actually asking families about that, you've really missed out on an important opportunity. And if we espouse to be doing person-centered care in our care facilities, I think our care conferences are not necessarily really reflecting that. I would say the care conferences are more staff-centered.
In the day-to-day interactions between family and care staff, is the care conference is that really the critical venue to engage on those issues, or are there other ways for family to have those concerns raised?
Particularly for families who are really involved, the day-to-day sort of informal interactions with care aides, for example, are really key pieces to the negotiation of care. Absolutely. For families who are less involved, care conferences might be one of those real only opportunities to interact with care staff. And then also thinking, for even with families who are involved, So they may have day-to-day interactions with the care aides or with the floor nurse and maybe with some allied health staff, but they're not necessarily having that opportunity to interact with a physician or with a pharmacist or with other professional staff. And that care conference might be the only opportunity that they actually get to meet those folks face to face. And for all those people to be within the same room together. So you have this real microcosm of that larger picture of the care facility coming together within the care conference, which is a golden opportunity to hear from everybody. And it could maybe be very dynamic. But so I think they do have the opportunity in the everyday experience, but that care conference is something special.
It seems to me that with care conferences in nursing homes, we have a formal structure here, but the day-to-day care and the day-to-day experience is not necessarily mapped cleanly onto that formal structure. And we have a situation where the formal structure of the care conference is doing one thing, and for many families and residents, that's not the venue and it's not a functional apparatus for their engagement, notwithstanding the potential that you just pointed out in terms of meeting with all of the professionals. It seems like it's like another layer that's not directly engaged with these important issues. Yeah.
That's a really great point. And to that, I can add that in our context, that informal exchange that happens between residents, families, and care staff is usually happening with a care aide or a resident care aide. And the resident care aide, they're not really showing up at the care conferences. There's not real space for them. In one of our sites, they got to attend the first few minutes of the care conference, and then they had to go off and do their duties. And so if we talk about that the intersection between formal and informal, and this formal structure not really sort of reflecting what's happening, I think that position of the care aide as well is kind of contributing to that kind of out of sync situation here.
We've observed the same thing in the United States. So I'm wondering what you think is behind that, and is that it seems like that's kind of a separate topic that you don't really get into in this particular article. Have you done other research on the involvement of aides?
Not specifically, but that certainly is a theme that was coming up within this care conference data set. And to keep the paper nice and tight, as we did focus primarily on family involvement. But families certainly reflected. It's like, where are the care aides? These people are the ones who know my family member the best. And they have, most of the things that I've got concerns about are concerning, the day-to-day care with that's delivered by the care aide. And so why are they not at the table? And so to your question about, why is that happening, I think there's a real, historical trend of the devaluing of care aides as well. They have the least amount of, in terms of the staff, they have the least amount of power within a care facility, at least from some of the things that we've observed.
To what extent do you think the care conference is the vector for improving person-centeredness and quality of life?
Yeah, that's a great question. As that sort of one of the opportunities for care planning and getting the staff together to talk in detail, potentially in detail. I don't know if you can get much said in 5 minutes, but so I think it's a piece of that whole picture, not necessarily being the sole mechanism by which care planning and setting goals of care can be done, but it's part of that. So I think it does have a real important role to play in that sharing and the dialogue amongst care staff and family and residents. And we haven't talked about residents too, but I think of some recent study by a group in Spain who talked about the inclusion of a resident with dementia in a care conference, and the staff reflecting how important it was for that person to be there, and they felt like they were able to improve quality of care because they're hearing about the first-person experience of that care and being called to task in some way or being complimented in another way about the kind of care that they give. So I think there's a bit of perhaps gravity to a care conference, as it is a bit more formal than just these informal exchanges. And depending on how it's documented, it really is a way to show licensing or regulators about the kind of care that you might be giving. So I think it's got an important role to play, but it's not the only mechanism by which person-centered care can be realized.
I have a methodological question about the care conference article.
Sure.
So my methodological question is about the selection of care conferences to observe. Were these families was this their first experience with a care conference, or were some of them representing residents who had been in the facility for some time and they had multiple opportunities?
There's a combination of both. So if I look, I think we observed 15 initial care conferences. So that was within what our regulations say is that it needs to be done within 2 months of a resident's admission. And whether that is happening, it just kind of depends on the mechanisms of the nursing home itself. But we observed 15 initial care conferences and then 22 annual care conferences.
And were the findings consistent between both the annual and the initial?
Yes. Yeah, which was quite surprising. So some of the initial care conferences were a little bit longer. So the conference that we observed that was 5 minutes long was not an initial care conference. But so the length of them and just the way the conference and the process of the conference and the content of the conference was very similar between the initial and annual, which was quite surprising to me.
Given what you've found in this study, given the way it appears that families are not being engaged in the care conference process, it really is pretty shocking to see how things are being done. And everybody who you've encountered nods and says, yes, this is my experience. This is what I've seen. Why do you think there hasn't been more scholarly research on this topic?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. When I was doing the background work for this project, I was quite surprised to see very little research. And I guess that's your experiences as well, is we're looking for something that unpacks that process of the care conference rather than looking just at the outcome, which is important as well. So there is a little bit more research in that regard about, are these effective or not? Does it improve person-centered care or not? But I think, at the heart of it is that I think the methodology to really enter into that space, it's a difficult space to negotiate. You have to observe. I believe that's probably the best method is observation, and then talking to the care staff. And that's very time-consuming. So ethnography is a very time-consuming methodology. And I think, the reality of doing some research that you might not get funding for that, or your funding runs out, or you don't have the personnel to be able to support the resources that you need to be able to execute a study like this. So I think that's part of it. That's the sort of the research culture. But I also think that some of our, I think it's hearkening back to some of the things that you've been saying, that, this is just something that we do in care, in nursing home care, and it's kind of flown a bit under the radar, yet it's something that happens all the time, and it's under the radar in terms of our regulations. It's not really regulated to say that you have to have a care conference. I think that's how it's taken up to do this sort of team care planning, which is regulated. But so I think there's multiple kind of layers to that of why it's not really being addressed in the research. So
I think there's...
I'm interested to know what you think about that.
Well, my experience was that there was some cynicism from the funding authorities in the U.S. about getting into the care conference process with the belief that, first of all, a belief that it's just not an effective tool for improving care. And just thinking, well, you're not going to move the needle by going to the care conference. And and then drawing the line to say we shouldn't be funding research into this because we don't think that it's a useful mechanism. And so, which was very frustrating. I only found one published paper from U.S. nursing homes on this topic. And it's really surprising to me, given the high level of interest in person-centered care, quality of life, quality improvement in nursing facilities, that this particular mechanism is not front and center. And if you look at the culture change movement in the United States, they're not focused on care conference as a tool. It's a whole house culture change and architectural remodel, staffing model. And I don't disagree with any of that, but you still have this particular formal process going on, which really sets the tone in certain ways, or it either sets the tone or it reflects the tone. Yeah.
I like what you say there, reflects or sets. I think it's both. Yeah. I do agree with you. Culture change is really taking on a very different number there. And I think something, I guess a bit of my cynicism comes through as well, in the sense of how about for the people and the facilities who are struggling right now? And what can we do to support them in improving care in the structure and process that they might have to deal with right now? And so it's like taking the short view and the long view, and mentoring facilities through person-centered care practices that they can adopt right away. So some of this is some of the recommendations that we have at the end of the paper. It's kind of low-hanging fruit. It's like, here is some language that you might want to use, like actually say hello and goodbye to the families in a care conference. Welcome them.
Right.
Ask for resident information and biography. Here's some things that you can adopt in this context, which could be, used in other contexts as well.
So let's leave on a high note. So you're identifying. So let's get to your positive recommendations. So you end the paper with a few positive recommendations. What do you think is the one straightforward thing that could be incorporated into nursing home care conferences tomorrow?
Straightforward thing, and maybe it's, I was going to say, my first thought was about using person-centered language, and my back of my mind and going, well, maybe that's not necessarily straightforward for many people. But I think something that could be implemented tomorrow, which takes very little thought is just introducing family and staff to each other within the care conference setting and
Yes.
asking family for the biographical information of the residents, or instead of staff talking about the biographical information of the residents. So there's two.
I agree. I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, it's not hard.
Well, I think you're right. I think that some of the things that we talk about seem like they're so diametrically opposed to the way nursing facilities are organized. But then if you think about it as a person's home, then
Yeah.
you have to think, then that just changes your frame of reference. You're like, well, wait a minute, I'm coming into your home, and
Yeah, exactly.
I need to treat you with the respect that I would to any host.
Yeah, absolutely.
And-
so
and
the care conference as a dinner party.
Well, I'll have a glass of wine and we'll hopefully make it
Yeah,
better.
we'll have a glass of wine and keep it just light, and make sure that everybody knows each other's name
Excellent.
and where they're coming from. That would kind of promote this feeling of mutual trust and respect and fun and just family and person-centeredness, I think.
Gloria, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Hey, no worries, Howard. It was my pleasure, and I'm super excited that we had this opportunity. So,
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to call my mom.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I wanted to talk to you about a interesting study that I just read, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. The study is about care conferences in nursing homes. Do you know what that is?
Well, I would assume that it's either a daily or a weekly conference that the nurses have with the doctors and the families.
Do you remember ever going to a care conference for Grandpa, for your father?
No, absolutely not. Never.
Because at the time, Grandma was not really up to it. She was a little sick and
She
it
was
was
out of
far
it
away.
completely. Yeah,
Right.
She was completely out of it. She was dying.
No, I remember. So
I know.
So what do you think about how involved a family member should be in that type of conversation?
In respect to what? The family situation where, similar to what happened with my father, where he was in the facility and his spouse was completely unable to participate?
Yeah, but you and your brother were involved. I mean, you guys.
Oh, yeah. But I wasn't sure if you were referring to his wife or his children, because his wife was still alive, even though
Right.
she was, in. No, we never had any interaction with them.
Do you think you should have?
Yeah.
What do you think it takes to have care delivered the way that you would want it for yourself, or if it was Daddy, God forbid, for him to be happy and comfortable? What do you think it would take? Do you think the family should have a seat at the table when those decisions are being made?
I think personally that you need a major conference at intake. There's no question about that. And it takes a few weeks until the family and the person involved and the nursing home personnel get to know each other and work out, details like he doesn't like ice cold juice, that kind of thing. But then afterwards, I think once a person is settled in and is getting regular care from the nursing staff and whatever doctors are involved. You don't need it that often. And hopefully the patient is being visited regularly by family members who can also, get to a nurse to find, to tell them, look, there's something not right going on here.
Really being there, being present, being there every day is the most important thing.
Basically, that's how to make sure that they're being cared for properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
First of all, if a person is in a nursing home, it's more reasonable than not that they cannot report
right.
properly what's happening.
Right.
And even the family member or good friend, whoever it is, has to be there on a regular basis to make sure that the person is being properly cared for. She needed to know that her mother was being taken care of by someone who cared for her, and it was involved in her, which is, I think that's the first important thing, that person who's being taken care of has to be seen as a human person,
mm-hmm.
not just somebody who's unable to stand up without help.
All right, Mom. Have a nice day. I love you.
Thank you. Love you too. I'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening. To learn more about The Gerontologist and to read its latest articles, visit the journal website at geron.org. The Gerontological Society of America was founded in 1945 to promote the scientific study of aging, to encourage exchanges among researchers and practitioners from various disciplines related to gerontology, and to foster the use of gerontological research in informing public policy.